All right, Sarah. Remember that ain't a toy. Once Clementine was within earshot of Troy and Sarah, she heard the man begin his instructions on handling the gun. Troy held the weapon gently, as if it was a child, and then the barrel was pointed down and away from them. If nothing else, he clearly knew how properly to hold a gun. Truthfully, Clementine was quite nervous and was all about it. She still couldn't trust Troy 100%, and his little outburst a little moments ago didn't do him any favors from that department. She approached the pair, and her eyes were locked onto Troy, ready to intervene if there was trouble. However, the man nodded towards her once he noticed her presence, straightened himself. Great, Clementine. You're just in time. I'm going to teach Sarah how to shoot one of these. Lifting up his pistol, Troy gave it a once-over and stepped towards the fence. Near the edges of the caged perimeter, a few run-down crates were set up with bottles on top of them. How do you, Clementine began, pointing at the makeshift targets. They were unpleasant reminders of shooting things like that on the train with Lee. We found those just thrown around the place. I think they're beer bottles or something, Sarah replied, her face scrunched up in disgust. Thank God for litterers, Troy added with a snort, earning a half-hearted glare from both the girls. What? If it weren't for them, we wouldn't be able to find shit to toss anywhere. Don't blame me. He then gave a shrug, inspecting the targets, crouching down and placing the gun on the ground. He adjusted the bottles to make sure that they were in a good spot on each of the crates. After they met their standards, Troy then turned around and handed the gun handled first to Sarah. The older girl simply just stared at the object as if though she didn't really see it there. Chewing on her own lip and raising her own gaze to look into Troy's eyes, Clementine caught the fear and hesitation and almost hidden behind the red glasses, nodding away as she shifted her weight from one foot to the next in anxiously. I don't know if I can, Sarah stammered, fiddling with the strange strings in her hoodie and apprehensive. One of those shot my... But of course her voice then trailed off and lowered her head, eyes screwed shut in mental pain. Clementine placed a hand on her shoulder. Sarah, I know it hurts, but you do need to learn. How else would Sarah survive in this cruel world? If she couldn't shoot a gun, she probably would have to rely on other people to live. That wasn't safe or really possible anymore. Clementine's right, Troy remarked, even though his voice didn't hold such menace. It's time to grow up, Sarah. Pushing the weapon further and placed it in the palm and stepped in behind her. With more gentleness than Clementine would have thought the man was capable of, Troy then guided Sarah's arms with the best hand he could, lining up with the barrel of the gun with the bottles near the fence. Sarah whimpered, glancing back at him with fearful eyes. What if I hurt someone? Troy scoffed. That's kind of frickin' point, kid. I mean, if it ain't, your allies, check what you're doing. Now take your eye off the gun. Not a good idea to see, and could get people killed if you ain't careful. Correcting her aim even further, he added roughly, shoot to kill, aim for the head. But y'all can't at the kneecaps. He then pointed towards the bottles squarely, squeezing an eye shut in concentration. The girl was visibly trembling with the sheer contrast to her last time she held a gun. While Clementine was glad she wasn't foolishly holding a weapon to her head as a joke, she still worried about her apprehension. An itchy trigger finger was not a good thing to have, even if it was triggered by the nerves. It's okay, Sarah, she encouraged, remembering Lee's lessons to her. To start, you should take a deep breath and let it out slow while you pull the trigger and aiming for it. Look through the notch at the tip, line it up with your target, going through a mental checklist of the things that she had learned. She quickly added, oh, and always pull the trigger steadily. Don't yank at it. Sarah blinked incredulously, although it was hard to digest all of this new information. It probably was very difficult, but she had to learn. Troy had put it in a rude manner, but Sarah did need it to be the adult. After a few moments, the girl nodded and took a deep breath. Okay, here it goes. Wait a second. Another crazy voice sounded. Before she could continue, when Clementine returned, she just noticed Mike approaching the group. His arms crossed, Troy, are you crazy? You didn't even tell anybody you were doing this kind of shit. What if you were just hearing gunshots and came running? His voice narrowed, clearly trying to glare the holes into Troy. The one-armed man wasn't fazed, though. Oh, fuck off. You're lucky I'm willing to do this in the first place, he scowled, turning back to Sarah, who lined up for her aim. After Mike waved over to Bonnie and made a no motion to indicate what was going on, he walked a bit closer to the two to inspect Troy's work. Man, you're way off there, Sarah, stepping in, his hands guided with the more accurate place for her to shoot, much to Troy's irritation. Once she seemed to have an approval of both adults and nodded from her, Sarah sucked in a deep breath, letting out slowly and squeezing the trigger. The resulting shot rang out and barely missed the mark, making her yelp and drop the gun immediately. Hey, don't frickin' drop it. It could go off, Troy hissed, picking it up immediately. Try again. Don't yell at her, Clementine snapped. Sarah, that was good. Maybe aim a little to the left now, she smiled, trying to be more encouraging. Sarah reflected the smile. Okay, Clem, I know what they're supposed to sound like. I just guessed I wasn't expecting that. Memories flooded Clementine's mind. Memories of the train, of how hesitant she had been told to hold a gun at first. It's okay, that's normal, she reassured. Remember, it's just a thing. Sarah merely huffed, doing as her friend had instructed, aiming towards her left, and at the second shot, the bottle that she had been aiming for exploded into dozens of shard glasses. But this time, when Sarah shrieked, it was of joy. I did it, she exclaimed, looking as if like a child at the accomplishment. Clementine couldn't help but smile and murmur her approval as Sarah lined herself up for the next shot, casting an unsure glance at the two men. Mike smiled. Now that was good. Now a little to the right this time, Sarah. I'd say she's dead on, Troy mumbled. You would say that, Mike shot back. But I think I know what your problem is, man. And what the hell is my problem? Another shot burst through the air before they could continue, visibly startling the both of them. Another bullet had hit them in the fence from behind the bottles, barely missing the mark. A frustrated cry, dang it, escaped Sarah's lips as she stomped down. Clementine chuckled. It takes some getting used to. But Mike was correct. Try the right. Grimacing, Sarah then once more lined up her shot. Clementine could visibly see her trying to do so as she instructed, sucking in a long gulp of air and pressing down slowly onto her lips. Her eyes narrowed behind the red frames, and a deep concentration embedded them. Her gaze was completely locked with the target bottle. Once she squeezed the trigger, the bullet shot right through it. That a girl, Mike cheered, pumping a fist into the air. Even Troy nodded his approval. Clementine flashed her a thumbs up. With a bright smile, Sarah made sure that her shot was in range and fired the bullet with almost no hesitation. After she barely missed the bottle, another shot ran through the air, hitting the target dead on. Grin widening, she bounced up and down. Yes, 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 she cheered. Hey, Troy squawked, leaning forward to take the gun with the barrel. Don't be jumping with what's this in your hand. Growling, he snatched it from her and added hesitantly, Seriously, Sarah, I mean it. It's not a frickin' toy. You use this to kill. Or hurt, Clementine corrected. If it's not a walker. Rolling his eyes, the one-armed man snapped. It's better kill regardless. Keep yours and the people with you are safe, Clementine. I'd figure surviving this long. His eyes flickered with the boldness she wasn't comfortable with, almost as if he was mocking her. Thankfully, Mike glared in a way in response. Lay off them. Sarah, that was awesome. Keep practicing, and you'll be used to it in no time. Sarah nervously chuckled. I'm not so sure if I want to be used to, but I guess I'll have to do. Thanks, Mike and Clem, and Troy. She then nodded, with each of them nodding in acknowledgement. Hey, anytime. Mike replaced a hand on his shoulder and replied, I'm serious. You're doing good, kid. You're learning how to protect, and that's what's keeping us all much safer. His smile faded for a moment. However, he cast over to Troy. Speaking of learning, Troy blinked, hesitantly clear in his gaze. What the hell are you looking at? I'm not blind, man. You're struggling with that arm and being left-handed now. Let me guess, you weren't trained on how to shoot with both hands? I can see plain as day. You were telling Sarah to shoot the way off target." He then took out his own gun and pointed at it with his left hand towards the remaining bottles. "Try holding it like this." Troy seemed as if though he was about to mam Mike on the spot, but his eyes widened with rage and his lips curling like a dog's. Clementine shot him a warning glance, but he didn't catch it. Thankfully, though, he had calmed himself down and recognized when he needed help, for once at least, attempting to mimic Mike's stance. "How do you even know how to do this?" he murmured, clearly unhappy. Mike smirked. "I'm ambidextrous. The hell is that, courageous? No, you dumbass. I mean is, I can do shit with both hands. I taught myself in middle school. Figure I'd come in handy someday. No pun intended. Although I didn't know I'd be teaching you how to shoot lurkers." "Yeah, and what do you want from me?" Troy demanded. "I know how this works. You ain't gonna give me tips for nothing for free. So what are you after?" Almost seeming offended, Mike wrinkled his nose. "You're joking, right? Troy, we're not in house anymore. It doesn't work like that anymore." Clementine glanced between the two, noting a way that Troy looked a bit more out of touch in reality. But at the end, though, she said nothing and then turned back to Sarah. "We should go," she whispered. "It's getting pretty late anyway." The older girl nodded. "Sounds good." A yawn passed by her quickly as she rubbed her eyes behind her glasses. Clementine echoed with a yawn of her own, turning to the two men. "We're gonna go join the others. If you keep shooting, try not to attract any walkers." Troy scowled. "Well, it's like everyone's been saying. Place is safe, though. We still got Kenny doing security." Quirking her brow, the girl pointed out, "You can't do it all night. We need someone to take over for him halfway, though." A roll out of her eyes was her answer. Fine, I get what you're saying. I guess I'll have to do it next then." That answer surprised her. She hadn't even asked him to do so, nor that she was implying anything of sort. He just assumed that she wanted him to, and he was going to do it regardless. Blinking a few more times in shock, she eventually forced herself to reply a thanks, to which Troy waved off almost immediately. "Just get to bed. We have a bright and early day tomorrow. I'm sure if Kenny has anything to say about it," he muttered with a lowly to a frown. "Good night, Mike. Good night, Troy. Trying to get some sleep too, okay?" Sarah gave out a small wave to them and left with Clementine towards the fire. Once the two returned, everyone seemed to be drifting away off to sleep. Everyone but Luke and Nick curled up and around the sleep by the fire, huddled themselves into for warmth. The two young men were just about settled down when they noticed the girls. "How did it go, Sarah?" Luke asked. "Did you learn some new stuff about shooting?" "Yes, I sure did. We're going to keep practicing starting tomorrow morning," Sarah explained enthusiastically. "It's a bit scary, but I still got some bottles. I think I'm getting better." Clementine nodded in her head in agreement. She was impressed with Sarah's learning, and Lee had been proud of Clementine like that when he taught her. "Good job," Nick praised, patting her lightly on the head. She giggled in response and pulled Luke in for a hug. The three of them held each other closely for a few moments. Clementine smiled at the scene, happy that the cabin survivors were growing closer friends. She almost felt like she was intriguing until Luke had placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression bright for the first time in a while. He simply nodded to her and wished them all a good night. "Good night," Clementine murmured, finding herself reflecting a happy look. She then gazed once more over at Troy and Mike, catching the way that the former man's shoulders slumped almost in defeat, and the way he looked like it was in another world. Maybe he had simply zoned out, but Clementine couldn't stop thinking about that something was wrong, that Troy hadn't been himself ever since they'd gotten here, or perhaps even earlier. Not like he'd tell her anything, anyway. She just shook her head in the clear and banished a curiosity, deciding that sleep was much more important. It probably wasn't anything serious anyway. "Good night, Sarah," she whispered to her friend, closing her eyes and drifting off almost immediately. She had been enjoying the quiet of the night, the way that the snow up had stopped and the gentle glow of the dying fire licked at her face. The flickers of the flames hauled her into a light sleep, her small body curled up like a cat next to Sarah's. The warmth of the other girl's body only added to Clementine's comfort. For a long while, she felt as if she was floating in the comfortable, warm bubble, away from the harshness of reality. It was so peaceful. She honestly felt like she hadn't felt like this in ages. It almost felt like she was back with Lee, safe as a child in his arms. A loud crash went through her warm half-dreams, her eyes snapping open and darting away for the gun on her side, expecting a walker right in her face. She hyper-focused around the area around her, her eyes darting wildly to locate danger. To her surprise, she couldn't spot anything wrong. Sarah was still asleep next to her. Luke and Nick were sleeping across from them. The fire was low but not completely out. The sky was still black and the sun was not out yet, peeking over the horizon. Blinking of most of her sleep from her eyes, Clementine gazed around at the whole sight, seeking of what might have made that noise. Perhaps it hadn't been as loud as she thought, but it was still enough to wake her from her comforting sleep. She was still a little irritated, as everyone else spread out a few meters away, probably floating in their own warm clouds and not ready to wake up. Clementine had been jerked away from her own dreams, consequently was left her restless. Carefully moving Sarah's arms around her torso, the girl was cleaning in her sleep, it seemed. But Clementine got to her feet and stretched. She might as well go find the cause of the noise and maybe take over watch while she was at it. Not like she was able to sleep again after that had startled her. Or hearing slightly quicker clink, she then reached for the gun and softly patted in the direction where it come from. The corner of the fenced area was the generator, where Kenny had gone to take his first position on watch. She remembered as she made her way over there, she passed his sleeping form seated with AJ on his lap. So who or what? She had her answer moments later. The agonizing tan pants of Troy spread out lazily against the fence, shoes scraping against the metal. As she got closer to him, she could plainly see Bonnie's bottle of alcohol placed next to him, his gun only in hand and the pistol pointed out towards the fence, on a complete edge, as if though a walker was coming for him. But after standing there for a few moments and holding her breath, hoping that he wouldn't notice her, she realized that there was no danger. It seemed to have dawned on him, too, for her to place the weapon down right through his hair, and it was then she noted the shards of glass strewn about him, colored the same bottles that he collected for Sarah to shoot earlier. "Troy?" she whispered, taking some steps closer. He cocked his head towards her, eyes hazily glassed over, his lips uncurled into a sneer, and swiftly shot out his arm to drop the gun and picked up one of the shards, the point of the edges and cutting into the skin, and threw it against the fence. It made a quieter clicking sound, but it still wasn't pleasant to her. A memory flashed through Clementine's mind. Nick huddled himself into the shed, throwing whiskey bottles against the wall in misery. The noise had been a problem then, just as of now, if not this time, given that they were out in the open. A scowl crossed Clementine's face. "What are you doing? You're going to wake everyone up. Stop it." He didn't realize that all they needed was much sleep, as much as they would get. The one-armed man simply snorted, not sparing any energy to try to even be quiet. His dull eyes once more cast over to her, frown settling in on his lips. "And you're going to try and stop me?" He slurred while she was trying not to even get close to him. She could recognize the harsh smell of alcohol in his breath. "You're drunk?" she asked, in curiosity. What did he think he was doing? "Yep," he replied simply, taking up the bottle next to him. Bringing to his lips, he shakily took another drink, some of the liquid escaping his mouth and sliding down his chin. After a few gulps, he pulled it back up and let out a long sigh. "Damn, that sting's going real down, but it's nice, you know." "You should have had a drink." "Too late, though. It's all frickin' mine now." "Troy, give it to me," she demanded, extending her hand for the bottle, but then he didn't move. She stepped forward and reached over for it, resulting in him scooting further away with the offended look on his face. "The hell are you doing?" he snarled, like an irritated animal. "You all had your turn to the toast. Now I got mine." Any patience she had with Troy was rapidly tearing thin. "You didn't want it," she reminded him, "and it's not good to have it now. Why are you all drinking it?" It made sense to her. Troy had refused to drink before, and had scolded everyone for even partaking in the toast. Did he just prefer to do it alone when he drank, or was there another reason? The man then chuckled, a smirk crossing his face, but his eyes slowly into mirth whatsoever. You have to ever put someone down, Clementine?" It had become quiet. She would have had to heard a pin drop to the snow. It was the absolute last question she expected him to ask, and the timing was completely wrong. Her breath got caught in her throat as she shoved the memories of shooting Lee at the jewelry store office from her mind. Finding that terror she still felt associated with those thoughts, not practical for her survival at all. Maybe it was because of Sarah's activity before, but feelings associated with Lee, while easier to push back those days, came almost physically painful. Well, Troy pressed, have you ever had to pull the trigger, seeing the depth of anyone's eyes looking back at you? Why would you ask that? She whispered, crouching down next to him, on her knees. For some reason, her heart was beating wildly, and she almost couldn't hear what loud pulse in her ears. What was he getting at with this sort of talk? Was it necessary now? And did it even have anything to do with his recent change in behavior? She had chalked it up to Troy just being usual moody self, but if there was something to do more. She didn't have to continue to ask, because he surrendered the answer almost immediately. Well, I had to. Put down a lot of times. We did it at Howe's. Bill would ask me to take them to the comic book store and just put them down. But I didn't know them. It wasn't personal, Troy sneered, bitterness laxing his tone. But twice, 2 times, I had to shoot folks I cared about in the frickin' head. And it sucks. It sucks so goddamn much. Clementine could only blink, completely stunned by the honesty in his words. He didn't even give her the opportunity to answer, however, and continued. My older brother and niece came with me to Howe's. They were only my frickin' family I've had, and before things went into crap. My brother Colton, goddamn, he was everything I wasn't. And Kylie, she was probably around your age, but much more naive. He then Pierce just readied himself, shaking his head. Shit, why am I even telling you all this? He flashed an accusatory glare over at her, as if she was responsible for any of this. She honestly didn't know why he was telling her. She had been the reason so guarded since he had joined the group, not revealing anything about himself personally apart from a few things here and there. Something had triggered this sudden change, and she didn't know what it was or why he was revealing all this now. I have no idea, she admitted, expression softening, and you don't have to continue if you don't want to. In the back of her mind, she hoped he wouldn't, as it was making her uncomfortable all of a sudden. It was making Troy seem more human, and more combination than just a click with her yet. She then waved her off in response, the alcohol sloshing around the bottle as it did. Nah, might as well, he mumbled. Ain't like I'm gonna be spilling the beans like this again. Can I ask you one thing first? She asked, raising an eyebrow in acknowledgement. Why are you drinking? At that, he gave a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Kid, folks don't need the frickin' reason to drink. But yeah, I guess I had one tonight. I just couldn't face the shit anymore. With that kid shooting his sister, with Jane being proud of all the fact that she's a shit older sibling. Why does that bother you so much? Getting to that, because of all that stupid shit you and Sarah frickin' saved my life, and that asshole Mike teaching me how to shoot with my better left hand for free? I don't get it, Clementine. I don't get why you're all being nice to me. I ain't shit. There was so much more sour tone to his voice. She wrinkled her nose. Though maybe once he would have agreed with him, she couldn't say that this was true, at least, not completely. He wasn't worthless, and did provide him some benefits to the group, like teaching Sarah to shoot. That meant something. People needed to be nice now, she explained quietly. Humanity is all we have left. Troy scoffed. Nice hero speech. Practice, ain't that shit? She then narrowed her eyes at him. She then rolled his down. Don't give me that look, you little shit. Y'all asked me a question and I answered. I don't get that sort of humanity thinking, and well, it's all reminding me of them. And that's why I'm drinking. Because I'd rather poison my blood with booze than face what I frickin' did. What did he do? Puzzled, Clementine asked, What do you mean? What did you do, Troy? Geez, will you let me fucking talk without interruption? After she shut her mouth, he straightened himself against the generator and continued. Me, Colton, and Kylie found Howe's nearly starving. It was a blessing, I'm sure you can imagine. Bill was real nice to us, offering us a place in his community. I ain't used to kindness like that, so I jumped the chance. That strange thought. She never considered Carver to be anything but a dictator. She had been seen running Howe's. Troy had before mentioned that he wasn't always the monster that had made a spectacle out of beating Kenny nearly to death. And by the way she spoke it now, it seemed that Carver was a lot kinder. Troy went on with the story, leaving her in no time to ponder. For a while, things were going good. Frick, me and Colton felt sort of safe there, and we thought it would be a good place to stay, settling ourselves into Bill's growing family. Kylie even started to smile again. The image of the little girl smiling around Troy just wasn't possible for Clementine. She had trouble believing that she didn't smack around his niece just like the other children at Howe's, but from the way he spoke, it seemed like he really did love her. What was Kylie like? She asked, trying to get him to explain on the subject. He snickered. She was all over the place, sort of. Quirky, I guess. Had a big imagination. Liked to color. Hyper as frick most of the time, too. No matter where you be, she'd always be listening and felt like she needed to weigh in her comments. Like a real chatterbox. Despite his annoying tone, it was hard to miss the slight smile settled into his lips. Clementine found herself smiling as well. Sounds like she was nice, too. Probably someone I would have been friends with at school. She remembered a few of her classmates being particularly energetic, too. Yeah, maybe. If she was a real kid, and I just don't say that shit about anyone anymore. I frickin' hate kids, but Kylie, she was... He trailed off, his smile fading. Your family, she finished for him, right? It's different when it's family, or found family, as Clementine had discovered. Troy rolled his eyes. I guess so. It was just so nice for a while. We all did our jobs, kept each other safe for the most part until... His voice cracked as it broke off, and after a few moments of his mouth moving open any words to continue out. One day, Colton and me were signed to do work while Kylie was outside. We didn't think it was a good idea or nothing, but Bill assured us it was fine. The kids could go outside jobs too, and she didn't have to do anything too strenuous. It was enough for her daddy and for me. As well as he spoke, Troy's expression grew more pained, as though he was bracing himself for the devastating turn that this story would surely take. Kylie did everything just fine that day. Didn't make a damn mistake, but someone else did. He closed his eyes, taking another swig of alcohol. Me and Colton. The fact is, we let her out without anyone really watching her, and no one had noticed the hole in the fence until a lurker's hand had broken through it. His tone grew once more quiet. She screamed and Colton was running like a madman. He got the thing off of her, but it ended up being too late. She got bit on her side, with a bitterless, joyless laugh. He added, she was asking a band-aid, didn't even realize what just happened. Clementine's expression fell, her heart practically throbbing in pity. She could unfortunately picture the scenario all too clearly. A little girl, innocent and naive for the way to end up captured and bitten by a stray walker. A father and an uncle with no one else to left to turn into with the decision of her fate. You said you had said before you had to put someone down, she mentioned. Why didn't Colton do it? He was his daughter, wasn't she? Then again, Lee had to put Duck down. Clementine couldn't even imagine the pain of the parent having to put their own child down, or even the opposite. She knew she probably couldn't have put her own parents down, or at least not at the time. Troy continued. After the bite happened, he just went into denial, told me to let it go and she'd have to get better. Me telling Bill it didn't work like that. Hell, Colton had seen me happen at first hand and a few people in our neighborhood we knew. But he didn't want to hear any of it. It came to the moment where she got sicker and sicker, and we had to do something. Even then, he still wouldn't do shit. An angry look then crossed his face for a moment, but a moment later, a drunken haze then returned to his eyes. So I shot her. Didn't even tell her I was doing it. I just did it and it was over. He took a particularly long drink of alcohol, then closed his eyes and thought. Clementine wasn't sure what to say. He didn't continue, so she just sat there, dumbstruck of what felt like hours. He was looking down towards her, but not really at her. His gaze seemed distant, as if though in another time period. Yet, eventually she mustered up the courage to let her ask a question. What kind of person was Colton before Kylie was, she inquired, not wanting to finish that sentence. Troy's expression changed quickly again. His mind really seemed to go off into another world. Colton, he was the only one that outmatched any kindness they all shown me. I swear that guy put Sarah to shame, like his naivety and optimism. But he was always thought things that would turn out alright, especially before Kylie got bit. Troy, you'll see, the world's gonna get better, and there's 3 of us stick together with what a load of shit. Troy's hand then began to squeeze the neck of the bottle tightly, his grip trembling with emotion. Damn it, this is why I never frickin' drink. It all just comes out at once, especially when I don't want to do it. He's shooting a glare over towards her and he hissed, Don't you think you're getting another part of my sob story after tonight, you little shit? It's not every day I do this sort of thing. Obviously, Clementine replied dryly, but go on, I'm listening. It was clear that he needed to get all of this out of his chest, and she was willing to hear him out. Troy mumbled just something under his breath, mostly curses, before he began speaking again. Well, anyway, that positive thinking turned out to be the idiot's downfall at the end, he snarled, the shakes then spreading out of his body to make it look like he was shivering. With a shaky sigh, Troy forced out the next words. I'd have to shoot him too. Put a bullet on the head of the only person I really looked up to. The only person who ever gave a crap about me. With a frustrated growl, he threw the ball towards the fence, watching it split into pieces and splatter with the rest of the liquid into the snow. She jumped at the noise, eyes darting outwards towards Troy, in case if he wanted to do anything drastic. His eyes only met hers, burning with regret, blazing down his brown irises. The look was so haunted, she honestly didn't know how to respond. Her eyes once more have softened. His lips were drawn into a frown. This sounded like it would be very hard for Troy to actually admit normally, but the mask of the alcohol was letting him say without any remorse. Though she thought it would have repercussions later. Clementine couldn't help but curiosity and asked, And did Colton get bitten? With a snort, the man faced the fence, focused on the shards of the glittered onto the ground. His legs curled up onto his chest, and suddenly he looked a little smaller. I never said he was bitten, he muttered, with an empty grin across his face. She then, startled, she raised an eyebrow and gave him a look of confusion. What do you mean? Troy just chuckled, the pain evident in his tone. You're sure stupid, Clementine. You should know how that thing's worked. Differently at house, Bill told you, I'm sure. I think about Reggie. He was weak of the will of character. She blinked, recalling the philosophers Carver had recited to her in his office. The older man had been so confident that he was doing something right, but that wasn't the case. Given what she had seen, he was only deluding himself under his underlinings. And Troy kept going, Colton was weak. Not like me. Bill even told me that I was stronger, and that I could see my brother was suffering, and I put him out of his misery, and it was not the only thing a strong man could do, so I did. He then spoke casually, but Clementine could tell that he was just saying this was hurting him. The alcohol clearly wasn't helping any much of the pain that she intended. He then tore his gaze from her and lowered his head, refusing to meet her eyes. And you all know the fucked up thing was? He asked, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Eventually I justified it by myself, but at the moment I really didn't want to. Really didn't want to. Guess that makes barely even louder than a whimper. Me weaker than Bill. It sure as hell proved to be that day later on. Anyone else see he was getting tired of me. He wasn't wrong. She had overheard Carver mutter something about Troy being an idiot in his office, and it wasn't hard to see Troy was getting on his nerves, and it made it clear how long Troy had been there, and if he had been getting close to outliving his usefulness to Carver. That doesn't make you weak, she began, trying to do what she could to comfort him. However, he did spoke with her a moment later. Don't interrupt, and don't give me a lecture like I'm frickin' Sarah or something. This is something that I don't need a pep talk for, Clementine. I just needed to all let it out before it ate me alive. Okay, she muttered. Okay, I'm sorry, I won't say anything. Keep going. He didn't hesitate to do so. As I said, Colton was like Reggie, Troy explained, his head shaking, too pathetic to continue. After Kylie's death, he just stopped, like he wasn't there anymore. And Bill made it clear that he wouldn't have it at house, not with that we had it at stake. Colton sounded a bit like Sarah, after what Carlos had died, but she'd gotten a bit better. If Carver had been patient with the man, he would have shaped himself back in reality as well. He would have carried it on as well, as if he was alive. Would the things have changed in House? She didn't even think that Troy would be the same, surely, but she supposed that she'd never know. Troy's voice then fell into a whisper. he deserved to die, but he put his risk his all competence. Killing one in order to save many is part of survival. It's one of the toughest decisions that a weaker person couldn't make. Clementine recognized this speech. It was the same one Carver had given her after he killed Reggie. Troy was reciting it word by word, and he went it hard on many times before. Actually, it wasn't hard to believe that he had heard it on repeat and memorized every last syllable. Despite his earlier warnings not to interrupt, Clementine wasn't liking where this was going, and she didn't want to hear any remains of that monster's morals and wanted to tell Troy to stop. But what he was saying was just an excuse. But stopped it short as he turned his head towards her, and she got a good look at his expression. Now Clementine had seen plenty of people in pain, but only found men usually be able to bury their feelings and attempt to keep tough. Kenny had cried when he lost Katja and Duck, but she only caught the sight of him whimpering as his eyes on his sleeve, hanging his head low. Lee had shown sadness to her, but hadn't really tried to push that burden into her. Nick hadn't even bothered to man up in the shed, and Clementine had appreciated that he didn't hide his misery for her sake. She didn't even ever had someone else like Troy who would be willing to share his emotions with her. Hell, if he was being honest with herself, she didn't even think that she was capable of feeling such things. In the short time that she knew him, it seemed to be a little more than brainless bully. But Clementine supposed that Troy continued to surprise her, whatever he intended to or not. She could see a clear window to the sorrow he was feeling. He wasn't crying, but his eyelids were narrowed and his lips were down at the crack of the right frown, eyebrows and scrunched up nose together, in the expression of feeling so much agony that it felt like he was. His jaw tightened and his bone cracking, as he put in so much pressure as if she almost feared it would snap off the hinges. She had never seen this sort of look on him, not even when he was at the verge of death. He was so invulnerable, so torn up and human. Honestly, she didn't like how that made her feel. Colton deserved to die, the man repeated, his voice rendered into a hushed whisper. He may have been justifying his own brother's death, though, through his words, but Clementine could see in his eyes and completely broken gaze, and he didn't believe a word of what he was saying. Silence fell between them, until Troy eventually lay onto the ground in exhaustion, falling asleep almost instantly. His body was right on top of the glass shards, but if they were cutting into him, he didn't seem to notice and slept on, dead onto the world. Clementine looked over at her watch, and sitting herself nearby, but not too close to him, she swept her gaze around the camp as she caught a gaze of one person, a curious soul that was just close enough to hear almost everything. Troy had just confessed. "Don't say a word," she mouthed to Jane, who was then staring back at her with the wide-eyed cat-like eyes. The woman then gaze flickered into the unconscious man, then back at Clementine, before she nodded firmly. It was impossible just to tell how much Jane had heard, but if they both could keep this under the wraps, it would be better for everyone. Hopefully Troy got what he needed off his chest, if only for his own mental state. Clementine wasn't so sure why she cared about him feeling better, but she did nonetheless. It was like he was becoming a real part of their makeshift foster family group.